It took exactly 3.7 seconds for Jenna Martinez's dream of peace to be shattered by a cream-colored envelope. After 10 years of military service, dozens of combat zone missions, and one honorable discharge, she thought she'd found a slice of calm in Serenity Springs, a neighborhood where the biggest daily crisis was whose begonias bloomed first. But when she opened that HOA violation letter, the one that labeled her loyal pit bull general as a dangerous breed, she realized the real war wasn't behind her. It was right across the street, behind floral curtains and binoculars. According to the letter, General was a liability. Never mind that he once woke her from a night terror so intense she couldn't breathe. Never mind that he fetched Mr. Vance's newspaper every morning and had become something of a local mascot. What mattered, apparently, was Bylaw 12, Section C. Jenna had spent years identifying threats, neutralizing dangers. She hadn't expected the greatest challenge to come from a woman in orthopedic sandals holding a binder of regulations like a Bible. What happens when military training meets suburban micromanagement? When PTSD meets passive aggression? When one pit bull becomes a community's moral battleground? Stick around, because in this town, peace has a price, and sometimes it wears a leash. After a decade spent on dusty air bases from Kandahar to Qatar, where the palette of life was 100 shades of beige and the air tasted of grit, the vibrant green of her small rented yard was a balm. She knelt in the soft soil of her garden, a trowel in one hand, her fingers tracing the delicate edge of a burgeoning tomato plant. This was her therapy. The scent of damp earth, the patient unfurling of a new leaf, the quiet hum of a distant lawnmower. It was the peaceful rhythm her life had lacked. Lying faithfully beside the flower bed was the other, more crucial part of her therapy. General, a brindle pit bull mix with a chest as broad as a barrel and a head full of loving thoughts, watched her with soulful amber eyes. His tail gave a lazy thump-thump on the grass whenever she glanced his way. He wasn't just a dog. He was her anchor. On days when the walls felt like they were closing in, when a car backfiring sent a jolt of ice through her veins, General's solid, reassuring weight against her legs was the only thing that could tether her to the present. He was the silent keeper of her unshared stories, the calm in her private storm. She'd found him at a county shelter, listed as a stray, his time running out. There was a quiet dignity in his gaze that she recognized, a resilience she felt in her own bones. She had been a K-9 handler in the Air Force, working with sleek, high-strung Malinois trained for detection. But General was different. She hadn't trained him to find bombs. She had trained him to find her, to gently nudge his head under her hand when her breathing became shallow, to ground her. And in saving him, she had, in many ways, saved herself. "What do you think, buddy?" she murmured, scratching him behind his soft, velvety ears. "More water for the basil?" General responded with a contented sigh, rolling onto his back and exposing his white belly to the morning sky. It was a picture of pure, unadulterated trust. This small patch of green, this quiet life, was all she had wanted. A place to heal, a place to be still. But stillness in Serenity Springs came with a price, and that price was conformity. The Homeowners Association, the all-powerful HOA, was the unseen architect of this enforced tranquility. Its rules were legion, codified in a thick binder given to every new resident. Jenna had skimmed it, noting the regulations on lawn height, trash can placement, and holiday decoration timelines with a wry smile. It seemed silly, but harmless. She didn't know she was being watched. From her living room window across the street, Carol Petty, president of the Serenity Springs HOA, watched the scene in Jenna's yard with a tightening in her chest. Her lips formed a thin, straight line. She wasn't looking at the woman tending her garden. She was looking at the dog. The breed was unmistakable. Its muscular build, its wide jaw. It was a pit bull, a walking liability, a violation. Carol's world was built on the foundation of rules. Rules kept things neat. Rules maintained property values. Rules prevented chaos. After a messy divorce had shattered her sense of control years ago, the HOA bylaws had become her scripture. Enforcing them was her calling. It gave her purpose. And that dog, lying so placidly in the sun, was a flagrant breach of the most important rule of all. She turned from the window, her heart beating a little faster with a familiar, righteous indignation. She retrieved her HOA binder from its dedicated shelf, her fingers flipping expertly to the correct tab. There it was, in black and white, a bulwark against the kind of unpredictable dangers that could shatter their peaceful enclave. 2 days later, the official notice arrived. Jenna saw it the moment she opened her mailbox. Tucked between a credit card offer and a grocery store flyer was a crisp, cream-colored envelope bearing the Serenity Springs logo. It felt oddly heavy in her hand. She sat at her small kitchen table, General's head resting on her feet, as if he sensed the shift in her mood. Her hands were steady as she slit the envelope open. She read the letter once, then twice, the words blurring as a cold wave washed over her. In accordance with the Serenity Springs Homeowners Association, covenants, conditions, and restrictions, it read, in sterile, impersonal type. This letter serves as official notice of a violation of Bylaw 12, Section C, dangerous breeds. The bylaw specifically prohibits the harboring of certain dog breeds, including, but not limited to, pit bull terriers and any mixes thereof. The words seemed to leap off the page, each one a separate stinging blow. You are hereby required to remedy this violation within 30 days of the date of this letter. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $50 per day until the violation is resolved. Remedy this violation. The clinical phrase echoed in the silent kitchen. It meant getting rid of General. The idea was so monstrous, so unthinkable, that she couldn't fully process it. 30 days. They were giving her 30 days to amputate a part of her soul. Her breath hitched. The familiar tightness seized her chest, the cold dread that she fought so hard to keep at bay. She felt the room shrink, the air growing thin. But before the panic could take hold, a wet nose nudged her hand. She looked down. General was looking up at her, his amber eyes filled with a deep, unwavering concern. He didn't know what the letter said, but he knew its effect on her. He whined softly, a low, questioning sound. Jenna wrapped her arms around his thick neck, burying her face in his warm fur. The sterile, perfect peace of Serenity Springs had just declared war on her, and it had aimed its first shot directly at her heart. The cold dread began to recede, replaced by something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. It was a hot, familiar anger, the kind of anger that didn't panic, the kind that focused. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered, her voice tight but firm. "They're not taking you, not without a fight." Across the street, Carol Petty placed a checkmark next to Jenna Martinez's address on her list. The notice had been sent. The rule had been enforced. The world, in her small corner of it, was being set right. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction. It was clean. It was orderly. It was a job well done. She had no way of knowing that she hadn't just enforced a rule. She had awakened a warrior. Jenna's first instinct was to fight fire with fire. The military had trained her to identify a threat, analyze it, and neutralize it. The HOA was a threat. Her training kicked in, a cold, clear logic overriding the initial emotional shock. For 2 days, she was a woman on a mission, her laptop glowing late into the night. She researched landlord-tenant law, Fair Housing Act provisions for assistance animals, and the legal precedent for HOA breed-specific legislation in their state. Her research led her to the Veterans Legal Aid Society, a pro bono service she'd heard about at the VA. After navigating a phone tree and spending 45 minutes on hold, listening to a tinny rendition of a patriotic march, she finally connected with a paralegal. The woman was kind, but her words were discouraging. "Yes, ma'am, we see these cases all the time," the paralegal said, her voice weary. "Technically, an emotional support animal under the FHA should grant you an exception. The problem is, HOAs have their own lawyers, and they'll argue that a pit bull constitutes a direct threat or an undue burden. They'll drag it out." "So I can fight it?" Jenna asked, a hopeful spark flickering. "You can," the paralegal confirmed, "but it's a war of attrition. They'll file motions, request depositions, demand veterinary records, training certifications, even a psychological evaluation from you. It can take a year, maybe more, and thousands of dollars in fees if you lose. They're betting you'll run out of money or patience before they do." Jenna hung up the phone, the spark of hope extinguished. A year of legal battles, a year of living with that threat hanging over their heads, the constant stress, the depositions, the scrutiny. It was the exact opposite of the peaceful life she had come to Serenity Springs to build. The thought of it made her feel exhausted to her very bones. She looked at General, who was now snoozing on his favorite rug, his paws twitching as he chased rabbits in his dreams. The lawsuit wouldn't just be a battle for her, it would be a battle that would poison the very sanctuary she was trying to protect for him. There had to be another way. The answer came unexpectedly from her neighbor. Mr. Arthur Vance lived next door. He was a 78-year-old widower, a retired accountant whose wife, Eleanor, had passed away 2 years prior. Since then, he'd become a man of rigid routines and quiet sorrow. Jenna knew him mostly as a gruff but harmless presence, a man who meticulously swept his porch every morning at precisely 8 a.m. She'd also noticed his pained, careful movements. A bad hip, he'd once grumbled to her over the fence, made the simple walk to the end of his driveway to fetch the morning paper a dreaded daily chore. Watching him one morning, Jenna saw not just a grumpy old man, but a problem that needed solving, a logistical challenge, and she was a master logistician. The thought hit her with the force of a revelation. She had been thinking like a soldier, planning a frontal assault, but she was also a K-9 handler. She knew how to win over a skeptical audience, not with force, but with skill and positive reinforcement. She wouldn't fight the HOA. She would sidestep them. She would launch a different kind of campaign entirely, a campaign of hearts and minds. Her first target was Arthur Vance. "All right, General," she said that afternoon, holding the rolled-up newspaper. "New mission." She spent the next few days working with him in the backyard. It wasn't about dominance or commands. It was a game. She used the shaping technique, rewarding the smallest steps toward the desired behavior. First, a treat for just touching the newspaper with his nose, then for picking it up, then for holding it. The trickiest part was teaching the gentle command, ensuring he held it without puncturing the pages. Within a week, he was a pro, carrying the paper around the yard with an air of immense pride, his tail wagging furiously. On Monday morning, Jenna watched from her window as Mr. Vance opened his front door. He peered out, his shoulders slumping slightly at the thought of the walk down the driveway. Just then, as planned, Jenna opened her own door. "General, go get the paper," she said with a cheerful command. General bounded off the porch, a brindle blur of enthusiasm. He trotted down Mr. Vance's driveway, gently picked up the newspaper, turned, and trotted back, depositing it carefully on the welcome mat right in front of the astonished man. He looked up at Mr. Vance, gave a happy shake of his entire body, and then trotted back home to Jenna for his well-earned praise and a piece of chicken. Mr. Vance stood frozen in his doorway for a long moment, the newspaper at his feet. He looked from the paper to the dog, now happily chewing his reward on Jenna's porch, and then he looked at Jenna. He didn't smile, not exactly, but the hard, grumpy set of his jaw softened. He gave her a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated respect. He picked up the paper, his back a little straighter, and retreated inside. The next morning, when General repeated his delivery, a small saucer was waiting on Mr. Vance's porch with 2 strips of bacon on it. Word traveled the way it always does in a quiet suburb, through the intricate network of morning walkers, coffee clatches, and garden fence gossip. Mr. Vance, it turned out, was not as solitary as he seemed. He told his story at his weekly breakfast with some other retirees. "Never seen anything like it," he'd said, his voice holding a note of wonder. "This pit bull, mind you, gentle as a lamb, brings me the paper every morning, perfectly dry." The story began to chip away at the monolithic image of the dangerous breed. A dog that delivered the newspaper? It sounded like something out of a folksy old movie, not a threat to public safety. Jenna's strategy was working, but she knew it was just the beginning. One friendly neighbor wasn't enough. She needed a coalition. Her next opportunity came a week later at the community park. She saw Mrs. Gable, a sweet woman in her 80s who walked with a cane, drop her keys in the thick grass. Jenna saw the woman's frustration as she tried futilely to bend down. "General," Jenna said quietly, pointing, "find it." The find it game was another of their favorites. General's powerful nose went to work, snuffling through the grass with intense concentration. Within 30 seconds, he'd located the keys, nudging them with his nose and looking back at Jenna for approval. Jenna picked them up and handed them to a flabbergasted and deeply grateful Mrs. Gable. "Oh my goodness," the woman breathed, looking at General with newfound admiration. "What a clever, clever boy, and they say your kind is trouble." Jenna just smiled. "Actions speak louder than bylaws, ma'am." She was building her case, not in a courtroom, but in a court of public opinion. Each act of kindness, each helpful task, was a piece of testimony. General wasn't just her support animal anymore. He was becoming a neighborhood asset. But as the tide of community opinion began to slowly turn, the storm from the HOA was gathering strength, and Carol Petty was preparing to make her next move. She had seen the bacon on Mr. Vance's porch, and it had filled her with a cold fury. This wasn't just a violation anymore. It was a rebellion. The rebellion, as Carol Petty saw it, was growing. It was no longer just the flagrant violation of the pit bull's presence. It was the way the community was beginning to accommodate, even celebrate it. The bacon on Arthur Vance's porch had been the first sign. Then she'd heard the story about the keys in the park. Her carefully curated order was being undermined by helpfulness. It was maddening. Carol's response was to double down on the rules. If the community wouldn't see reason, she would force it upon them through official channels. Her second letter to Jenna was harsher, more threatening. It arrived not in a cream-colored envelope, but in a stark white one, sent via certified mail that required a signature. This time, it cited Bylaw 7, Section A, nuisance. The term was deliberately vague and therefore powerful. The animal in question, Carol had written, is now causing a nuisance by roaming onto other properties to engage in unsolicited activities. It was a masterful, if infuriating, twist of logic. General's good deeds were being reframed as intrusive behavior. The letter concluded with a new threat. The board would be holding an official hearing at the next monthly HOA meeting to vote on levying the fines and enforcing the animal's removal. To bolster her case, Carol became a surveillance agent. She would sit by her window, her phone camera ready, waiting to catch General in the act. The photos she took were almost comical in their lack of menace. General with a newspaper in his mouth, General nudging a dropped glove with his nose, General sitting patiently while Mrs. Gable stroked his head. But in Carol's mind, each photo was evidence: trespassing, unsolicited contact, nuisance. She meticulously labeled each image file with the date, time, and property address, building her dossier for the hearing. What she failed to see was the other network growing in parallel to her official one, a network built on gratitude and genuine connection. And that network was about to find its voice. Chloe was a college student, living with her grandmother, the aforementioned Mrs. Gable, for the summer. She was bright, perpetually online, and had a keen sense for social dynamics. She'd witnessed the key finding incident and was deeply impressed. When her grandmother started telling everyone the story, Chloe saw an opportunity. "Grandma," she said one afternoon, "people need to see this stuff. A story is one thing, but a picture, a video, that's different." Chloe found Jenna and General in the park the next day. "Excuse me, Ms. Martinez," she began a little nervously. "I'm Chloe, Mrs. Gable's granddaughter. I think what you're doing is amazing, and what the HOA is doing is awful." Jenna, accustomed to fighting her battles alone, was taken aback. "Thanks, we're just trying to get by." "You're doing more than that," Chloe insisted. "You're changing people's minds, but you need to control the narrative. Right now, Mrs. Petty is defining General as a problem. We need to define him as a hero." And so the Serenity Springs Good Boy Facebook page was born. Chloe was a natural social media manager. Her first post was a picture she'd snapped of General on her phone, sitting proudly after finding her grandmother's keys. The caption was simple: This is General. The HOA calls him a dangerous breed. My grandma calls him her little hero after he found her keys today. Who do you agree with? The post got 12 likes within the hour, mostly from neighbors. Then Chloe got proactive. She filmed a short, shaky video of General's morning paper route to Mr. Vance's door. She interviewed Mr. Vance on his porch. "He's a good boy," the old man said, looking directly into the camera lens, his usual gruffness replaced by a fierce loyalty. "Better neighbor than some of the humans around here. The HOA should be giving him a medal, not trying to kick him out." That video got 50 shares. People from neighboring towns started commenting. Chloe created a recurring feature, the General's Daily Deed. She posted a photo of him carrying a small bag of groceries for a resident who had just had knee surgery. She posted another of him simply sitting with his head in the lap of a man who was recently widowed, providing silent, comforting companionship on a park bench. The Facebook page did something Jenna's quiet campaign could not. It consolidated the scattered goodwill into a visible public force. It gave the supporters a place to gather, to voice their opinions, and to see that they were not alone. The comments section became a de facto petition. "This is absurd. That dog is an angel." "My kids love seeing General on our walks. He's the sweetest thing." "Carol Petty needs to get a hobby. Leave this veteran and her dog alone." Carol, of course, saw the page. A well-meaning but misguided board member had sent her the link, thinking it might make her reconsider. It had the opposite effect. To her, this wasn't just a rebellion anymore. It was a public mutiny. They were mocking her. They were undermining the very authority that kept their community safe and pristine. Her fear and her righteousness curdled into a hard, bitter resolve. She saw Jenna Martinez not as a quiet veteran seeking peace, but as a calculating instigator. She saw the community's support not as genuine affection for a dog, but as a sentimental foolishness that threatened to unravel everything she had worked to protect. The date of the HOA hearing loomed, no longer just a procedural meeting, but a showdown. On one side was Carol Petty, armed with her binder of bylaws, her grainy photographs, and the unshakable conviction that she was in the right. On the other was Jenna, who had never wanted a fight, but who had inadvertently built a small army of allies armed with something far more powerful: stories of kindness, bacon, and a good boy who delivered the morning paper. The stage was set for a battle over the very soul of Serenity Springs. The week leading up to the HOA hearing was thick with a nervous tension that even the perfectly edged lawns of Serenity Springs couldn't conceal. Jenna felt it as a constant thrum beneath her skin, a familiar anxiety she had hoped to leave behind in the desert. Sleep offered little escape. She would wake in the pre-dawn darkness, her heart pounding, with General's cold nose immediately nudging her arm, as if to say, "I'm here. We're here." She focused on routine, on the tangible things. She weeded her garden with a fierce intensity, pulling up rogue dandelions as if they were the bylaws themselves. She went on long walks with General, deliberately taking paths that led past the houses of his supporters, drawing quiet strength from the friendly waves and smiles they received. Chloe and Mr. Vance became her informal strategy team. They met on Jenna's porch, a strange but effective trio: the weary veteran, the gruff octogenarian, and the tech-savvy millennial. "She's going to come at you with rules, Jenna," Mr. Vance said, his hands clasped over the head of his cane. "She'll talk in section numbers and clauses. It's meant to intimidate, to make you feel small and out of your depth." "And we'll come back with facts," Chloe countered, scrolling through her phone. The Serenity Springs Good Boy page has over 200 local followers now. I've printed out the comments. It's a stack, 3 inches thick. It's our evidence. "It's more than evidence, Chloe," Jenna said softly, looking at General, who was dozing at her feet. "It's character testimony." The phrase, once used in military hearings, felt right. She wasn't going to argue the legality of pit bulls. She was going to prove the character of one specific dog. The evening of the hearing arrived. The community clubhouse, usually reserved for potlucks and holiday parties, had been transformed into a makeshift tribunal. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table at the front, where Carol Petty and the other 4 board members sat. The room was unnaturally quiet and smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Jenna walked in with Mr. Vance at her side, Chloe a step behind. The room was surprisingly full. She saw Mrs. Gable, the man from the park who had lost his glove, the family with the young kids who always stopped to pet General. They weren't just curious onlookers. They were her reinforcements. They nodded at her, their faces etched with support. For the first time, Jenna didn't feel like she was fighting alone. Carol Petty called the meeting to order, her voice sharp and formal. She moved through the initial agenda items with brisk efficiency before arriving at the main event. The next item on the agenda is the ongoing violation at 112 Blossom Lane concerning the harboring of a prohibited animal. She launched into her presentation, her voice devoid of emotion. She was organized, thorough, and utterly cold. She cited Bylaw 12, Section C. She cited Bylaw 7, Section A. She projected her grainy phone photos onto a pull-down screen. "As you can see," she said, pointing to a photo of General on Mr. Vance's lawn, "the animal repeatedly trespasses onto neighboring properties. Here it is again, initiating unsolicited contact. This behavior, while framed by the resident as helpful, is a clear nuisance and a violation of the peace and privacy of our community members." She spoke for 10 minutes, building a case that was legally sound but emotionally hollow. When she finished, a chilling silence hung in the air. She looked out at the audience, her expression one of stern certainty. "The board will now hear from the resident, Ms. Martinez, before we move to a vote on the recommended fines and removal order." Jenna's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. She stood up, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the silence. "I'd like to say something first." All heads turned. Arthur Vance was slowly, painfully getting to his feet, leaning heavily on his cane. He didn't look at Jenna or the board. He looked at his neighbors. "My name is Arthur Vance. I live at 1-14 Blossom Lane. I'm one of the community members whose peace and privacy was supposedly violated." He gestured to the screen where the photo of General on his lawn was still displayed. "That picture," he said, his voice raspy but strong, "was taken at 7:05 a.m. last Tuesday. That unsolicited contact was that dog, General, bringing me my morning paper. Something he does every morning. My wife, Eleanor, used to get the paper for me. Since she passed, that walk down the driveway, it's gotten harder. I've fallen twice. Nothing serious, thank God. But the fear of it is there every day." He paused, and the room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. "That dog doesn't violate my peace. He gives me peace of mind. He's not a nuisance. He's a neighbor, a better neighbor than I've been lately." He looked directly at Carol. "And if that's a violation, then the rules are broken, not the dog." He sat down. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Before Carol could restore order, Mrs. Gable stood up, her hand shaking slightly. "He found my keys. I would have been stranded in the park if it weren't for that sweet animal." Then another resident stood. "He brings our garbage cans back up from the curb on windy days." Then Chloe stood, holding her phone. "And I'd like to show everyone the Serenity Springs Good Boy page where dozens of your residents have shared similar stories." One by one, they stood. One by one, they shared their stories. It wasn't an argument anymore. It was a testament. The cold, sterile case Carol had built with her bylaws and photographs crumbled under the weight of simple, human kindness. The narrative had been completely, irrevocably flipped. Carol sat stunned, her face pale, her binder of rules looking flimsy and powerless on the table before her. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, looking instead at the faces of their neighbors. A quiet board member, a gentle man named David, finally spoke into the microphone. "Carol," he said softly, "perhaps you could tell us why this specific rule is so important to you. It seems the community doesn't see this animal as a threat." Carol looked cornered, her composure finally cracking. Her eyes welled up, and her voice, when she spoke, was a choked whisper. "Because rules keep you safe," she said, her gaze distant. "When I was a little girl, a big dog, a stray, it bit me, badly." She instinctively touched a faint silvery scar near her temple that no one had ever noticed before. Everyone said he was a friendly dog, too. Everyone said he was harmless. A wave of understanding, not of justification, but of human context, washed over the room. Her rigid enforcement wasn't about power, not entirely. It was about fear, a deep childhood fear that had calcified into an inflexible worldview. In that moment, she wasn't the tyrannical HOA president anymore. She was just a frightened woman trying to prevent the world from hurting her again. The fight was over. The vote that followed was a mere formality, a quiet landslide that affirmed what everyone in the room already knew. The motion to find Jenna and remove General was defeated with only one vote in favor, Carol's. Then David, the gentle board member, proposed a new motion to form a committee to officially review and amend Bylaw 12, Section C. He nominated Mr. Vance to lead it. The motion passed with a unanimous chorus of ayes. The motion to amend the bylaw passed with a roar of approval, followed by applause that filled the sterile room with warmth and life. But David, the gentle board member, wasn't finished. He held up a hand for silence, and when the room settled, he leveled a calm but firm gaze at Carol Petty. "The board has one final piece of business," he announced, his voice carrying a new weight of authority. "This board cannot ignore the clear evidence presented tonight of an abuse of authority. We have seen a pattern of targeted harassment against a resident, a veteran of the United States Armed Forces, and a willful misrepresentation of community bylaws to pursue a personal vendetta. This is unacceptable." Carol's face, A mask of disbelief turned ashen. Therefore, David continued, I call for a formal censure of President Carol Petty for conduct unbecoming of her office, and I ask for her immediate resignation. A stunned silence fell, followed by a groundswell of murmured agreement. Another board member quickly seconded the motion. All eyes were on Carol. Defeated, stripped of her authority and her self-righteousness in one swift public blow, she did the only thing she could. Without a word, she pushed her chair back, gathered her useless binder of rules, and walked out of the room, her exit punctuated not by sympathy, but by the resolute silence of the community she had tried to rule. David then turned to the audience, his expression softening. And now, to properly form the new Bylaw Review Committee, the board asks if Mr. Arthur Vance and Ms. Jenna Martinez would be willing to serve as co-chairs. The room erupted again, this time in a standing ovation. Jenna looked at Mr. Vance, who was beaming, his eyes twinkling for the first time since she'd met him. It was more than a victory, it was a mandate. She had not only defended her home, she had been entrusted to help redefine it. 2 months later, the crisp autumn air was filled with the scent of grilled hot dogs and freshly turned earth. The sterile patch of common lawn behind the clubhouse was gone, replaced by the bustling site of the new Serenity Springs Community Garden. A large hand-painted sign, crafted by Chloe and her friends, was hammered into the ground near the entrance. Eleanor's Garden, in honor of Mr. Vance's late wife. It was the garden's official groundbreaking day. Families milled about, children chased each other with shrieks of laughter, and Mr. Vance, looking 10 years younger, directed volunteers with the cheerful authority of a general deploying his troops. Jenna stood at the center of it all, a ceremonial silver spade in her hand. For the occasion, Chloe had made General a custom bandana that read, Head of Garden Security. The big, brindle dog sat proudly at Jenna's feet, occasionally licking the face of a passing toddler, his tail thumping a happy rhythm against the ground. Ready, co-chair? Mr. Vance called out with a grin. Jenna looked out at the sea of smiling faces. Mrs. Gable, Chloe, the family whose garbage cans General rescued, the dozens of neighbors who were no longer strangers. This was her squadron now. This was her community. With a deep, cleansing breath, she smiled back. Ready, she plunged the spade into the rich soil, turning the first piece of earth for a future she had fought for and won. This was the peace she had been searching for, not the silent, fragile peace of isolation, but the loud, vibrant, and resilient peace of belonging. Her anchor was home, surrounded by the family she had helped build, in the community she had helped heal.